University of Michigan, I think, chose me in a sense. Well, I had the privilege of coming here as a 4-year-old to my uncle's law school graduation. And as folklore tells it, because I don't recall, I was enamored apparently, and I can imagine that because I still am always in awe of all the regalia and just the pomp and circumstance of commencement ceremonies. And of course, I looked up to my uncle. It's actually a play uncle. And apparently I shouted out in the middle of a ceremony, I want to graduate just like Uncle Sam, which he took to heart, meaning law school and, of course, University of Michigan. Not an attorney, but he and his wife, my play aunt, would still take me up after that point, I think, to just really reinforce that whole idea to every homecoming, I believe, throughout my childhood. So I got to know campus a little bit that way. But when the time came to make my decision about where I wanted to go to college, Pepperdine University was my first choice. Why? Because I was a volleyball player in high school, and at the time Pepperdine was volleyball champs, and who wouldn't want to be in school in Malibu, right? I got there, spent a semester before I realized it wasn't for me. Culture wasn't quite what I was expecting, and I had already been accepted to U of M thanks to my guidance counselor in high school at the time. Actually kind of dropped my name in the hat. I kind of wanted to be as far away from Detroit, not because I didn't like it, but because I wanted to just see how the rest of the world lived. And was a part of, at that time, U of M did sort of like on-the-spot kinds of admissions processes, and he said, you'd be a great candidate for U of M. I said, yeah, okay. Sure. But of course, once I transferred here, which I was able to do seamlessly after only one semester at Pepperdine, when I came home for that winter break of my freshman year, I started right away here at Michigan, and it enveloped me, and I absolutely loved every moment of my experience here. I do. I remember distinctly because when you come mid-year, there's not quite all the, you know, the revelry of welcome. uh, so I remember driving up and down Washington Avenue at the curve where it turns into Huron with my mom and my grandmom in the car. And we just could not figure how to get over onto Forest Street because my dorm was Alice Lloyd. And we must have driven by Palmer Field at least 100 times before we finally figured out how to get over there. But once I was sort of settled in and oriented, I remember also, I think everyone probably their first memories on campus are like how many times they got lost. Actually, trying to find Lorch Hall, which is ironically just behind this building, it's that way, for a psychology class. So once I got past those first days of sort of meandering and wandering and finding my way, of course, I started settling into the norms of being a student on this campus and engaging in student life and meeting some friends that are lifelong friends now. I've known them since my days here at U of M, including at that time the dorm minority councils or diversity councils. I think that was what they were called. I'm not sure if they're still called that. I think we're brand new, or at least I remember feeling kind of newish, and had the opportunity to accept a leadership role at Lloyd, working through Mystic. I wonder now, as I say, if it still exists. Minority Youth Striving to Incorporate Cohesiveness was our dorm minority council. And then, of course, the labs, Pepperdine being a really small school, actually smaller than my high school population, walking into that first class, I remember one of my first classes being in the natural science auditorium, and being just sort of stunned by the magnitude of the audience, the people. But again, making great connections with wonderful folks and fellow students who become lifelong friends, and even some professors. Yeah, well, and for me, it was a matter of pursuing my passions, but also sort of making sure I gave myself an opportunity to explore all that the university has to offer, but not wanting to waste time, because time was money. And when you're paying your own way through school, switching majors a few times, yeah, you soon realize that that's not the most financially expeditious and, savings-oriented way to go about getting your degree. So fortunately, I was pretty clear early on what my passions were. I just had to figure out how to merge the two, which hence the degree in English, because loved literature, loved writing. Imagine the possibility of a career in journalism of some sort, but have always wanted to be a teacher my entire life. Probably, I would say, after I spoke those words at my uncle's graduation about wanting to graduate just like him, I probably whispered to someone else, but I want to become a teacher, not a lawyer, because that's always been a passion of mine. So again, the program, which still exists today, which allows people to get their degree in their content area or their major from LS&A, and their teaching certification at the secondary level to be able to teach middle and high school, which is what I wanted to do, is the program that I was in at that time, which I probably get to chair now, which is ironic, but I'm very proud to be able to have experienced the program as a student and now help other students make their way through.
Yeah, did you have
I remember quite a few moments, I would say, at least, if not the whole class. The Sublime and Gothic in literature stands out for me forever, because I was probably confused much in that class. A lot of artistic references and so forth, and it was really heady material. It was deep. It hadn't been pushed in that way. That's probably why I liked it. Conceptually, I never thought about subliminalism in terms of how it was represented in literature. And all it took was the professor making a reference to Batman and the Gothic and so forth, and it just sort of all rushed to, like, I get it. I don't know if that was early enough on in the class. I mean, I'm proud to say I did well in school, but I remember being highly perplexed by that particular class. Another that I remember absolutely loving was a film class. It was, can't remember the title of it, but that particular class taught us how to analyze film as though it were literature. And again, had not at that point in my life thought of the two as being all that similar, but having taken the class and now having been an English teacher for a while, it's so obvious how similar they are, but was exposed to some films that I probably would have never witnessed before on my own, and came to appreciate a genre that I had a first exposure to in that class. Professors, I had a Shakespearean professor at UW. Again, I don't know that he was my favorite, but he was so impassioned, you couldn't help but just love him and love what he was teaching, right? And I love Shakespeare, so that was a good match. And then the other was a Media in American History class. Again, had not quite studied those two in the same context, and the professor happened to be the most fabulous storyteller. So I remember eagerly wanting to go to hear, like, what is he gonna share with us today? It didn't feel like a lecture in its traditional sense, and often being on the edge of my seat. He was a professor emeritus, and just his wisdom just oozed, and you just wanted to just keep just sitting there, just taking it all in. My English methods professor is one of my colleagues now, Dr. Ann Gear, and so I think she had a huge hand in my learning to do the work of teaching English, and so it's just, again, very serendipitous to be able to, because I certainly wasn't planning it this way, to be a colleague of hers and to interact with her in that sort of extension of a way, because I'll always sort of view myself as a, as a what shall we say, a junior to her. And, again, I remember some distinct instances in her class where we were asked to deliver a lesson, and she sort of threw in a wrinkle of being sort of that student who wasn't cooperating in class during a lesson. And I remember her putting on like sunglasses and chewing gum really loudly and sort of slouching in her seat to see how we would handle keeping students engaged while we were trying to teach them this important content. So lots of fond memories, classes and people and professors. Massive social issues. So I have been fortunate. My uncle, the same one who graduated from law school, was a leader in what was called BAM 1, the Black Action Movement. So I heard lots of conversation, his experience about BAM 1. I was here just after BAM 2, but some of the same people who were really a part of the BAM 2 movement were still fellow students because they hadn't yet graduated, even though the movement itself had, sort of expired at that moment, if you will. And then now to see the new student activism around basically the same issues, the hashtag BBUM, being back at U of M movement, is, again, it's just fascinating to see the cyclical nature of this, how I think we have evolved along issues of diversity. Being an administrator at the school, I'm in on quite a few conversations of just that movement and the people involved with it, because as a matter of fact, they've gone back, and the current students have gone back to consult with people from BAM 2, at least, maybe even BAM 1, but I know for sure BAM 2, which were some of my schoolmates when I was here. I thought was wisdom on their part to find out about that experience and what worked and what didn't then. So it'll be interesting to see what is the outgrowth of the BBUM movement, but I'll say this, when I was a student here in the School of Ed, I don't recall I certainly didn't have a professor of color. And if you go out in this hallway, I don't think it's blocked by construction. There's a wall of faculty, and you can see every faculty member represented, and you'll see that there obviously has been effort on the part of our dean, who's very committed to these issues, to recruit faculty who represent a wide variety of not only racial diversity and ethnic diversity, but even diversity in points of view, because that's how we all grow, right? So people who don't necessarily come here are already drinking the Kool-Aid, so to speak, have some new ideas and new thoughts. I don't believe there was a faculty picture wall when I was a student here, but if there were, I'd venture to say that it certainly didn't look the same in terms of the types of difference that are represented in the people that I'm privileged to call my colleagues now. So again, still plenty to do, but I feel good being a part of discussions and being a part of decision making that I think is headed in the right direction with regard to that particular effort. I just love that the people there, despite what media might want to portray, though I'm starting to hear a new discourse in the media. I just wish people didn't feel like this just sort of came about recently. People in Detroit have always been passionate. They've always been hardworking. Many of the people there are transplants from other communities that when they came to Detroit to work because of the automotive and manufacturing industries and being able to get really great paying jobs, oftentimes with very little education. So that's all people in Detroit I've ever known really know how to do is work. And people who care about their neighborhoods and their neighbors. It gets overshadowed, unfortunately, about the stories about crime and what have you. I went to school downtown. At the time that I was down there, there was some vibrancy in downtown, but we saw the sort of the abandonment of downtown during Coleman Young's, particularly his latter years as mayor, and now to sort of see the resurgence of all the activity and people falling in love with my hometown again and seeing in it what I've always seen and many of my neighbors have always seen in it it's exciting. And again, despite all of what's going on, I think Detroit just had one of the, if not one of the largest foreclosure events in American history just a couple of weeks ago with the tax foreclosures, but you still see people hanging on, not just because they have nothing else all the time, it's because they truly care. I chose when I left here to go back and live in Detroit. I lived in Detroit the whole time until I got this job just 5 years ago, and not only because I was kind of tired of commuting. I'm getting at the point in my life where I'd rather not be driving 20, 30 miles to work, but outside of that, there was no intention on my part or the part of my family to leave Detroit. I think it's all in how you see it, right?
Yeah, so you're optimistic about
it? Yeah, it's like anything. I think it will circle back around. Again, the bright spots have always been there. People have just chosen sometimes, I think, the media or whomever, to not recognize them and promote them. I found myself saying this to my own son is soak up. I mean, there's so much here. And when you're 18 years old, it's hard to sort of take it all in and even know what all is here. The university is like a universe, right? There's just so much. And I think, again, because of just my circumstance and the focus on getting through and doing as well as I can, getting through despite the obstacles that I had, there's so much that I probably didn't even scratch the surface of around, like student life, even connecting with professors. I think Europe may have just been starting when I was leaving campus at the time, maybe. Her vague mention of it. Apply for Europe. Who wouldn't want to have that opportunity to do research with a faculty member here? That's pretty awesome. So while your job here is obviously to be a student in a traditional sense of completing your degree requirements or what have you, I think really being a student means really connecting all the various opportunities to what you desire and what you want for your life, and what the university can do to play into that.